Does anybody have a question that they'd particularly like to address to, well, Michael or Paul or Russell at the moment?
Hi. Doesn't the inability of the models to correctly predict reality just give opportunity to people who are actually looking for genuine value in investment and represent inefficiency in the market that can be exploited by others?
That quote about, the Keynes quote about the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent is kind of very relevant there, because you may be perfectly correct in your view of something, but the market could, you could easily lose your shirt waiting for the value to match the price. So I think that's a big issue. So that's something you have to build in, as Keynes said. You have to try and predict what other people are going to do rather than what should be.
So that is the right answer, but it's interesting to go back to incentives and what is the incentive of a professional manager, because it really plays into that. The incentive of a professional fund manager is to keep their job until Christmas. That is your incentive, because that's when the bonus arrives. It'd be nice if I could tell you that it was something other than that, but to Paul's point, who the hell is going to rush out of the foxhole and charge full tilt into selling from an equation if your main job is to keep your job until Christmas? So maybe in a world, the quants actually, I think, make it much more difficult, but because I think you can get this wave of selling, and we assume that there's always the informed buyer. This is the efficient markets hypothesis. And the informed buyer will jump up, but the incentive structure is such that there are virtually no informed buyers.
Michael, do you want to add?
No, you just touched on, Russell, the efficient market hypothesis, and it's perhaps something that will come out a little bit more in some other questions, but I'd be interested in both your views on that, because we, as academics, we stress that a lot, and then some students say, well, if that's the case, why do we have financial crises?
Well, one of the basic principles of quantitative finance is that you value things according to the no arbitrage principle, and that's the idea that you just figure out what's the fair value of something. It's like making a table. What's the components add up to? How much is it going to cost you? And that's what the value of the table is. But in that case, if they're working on the idea of no arbitrage, that there's no profit to be made, how are they also expecting their 7-figure bonus? So how they divide, be able to think in these two conflicting ways. One of the things that the quants do, I'll use an example from car insurance. That is that if you're trying to figure out how to value some credit derivative, you want to know the risk of default of some company. Well, let's think in terms of car insurance. If you've got a car that's worth $20,000 and your annual insurance is $1,000, what the quant will say is, oh, $20,000 car, $1,000 car insurance, that means there's a 1 in 20 chance, that's a 5% chance of crashing. Now, they completely miss the fact that the price, the cost, is completely different to the value, because the insurance company has to make a profit. Maybe 40% of what you pay goes to compensate for the risk of you crashing, writing off the car. The rest goes in admin and websites and CEO bonuses, etc. So the quants just don't see. And then you take the situation where a quant goes into it, wants to get a mortgage, and they don't think, they listen to the 12-year-old behind the counter get advice on mortgages when they're supposed to be the expert in fixed income. I don't understand it, how quants manage to have these parallel brains, the normal brain and then the maths brain. My brain is kind of all, it connects.
Well, I would just add to that certainty sells. So if you want to make a lot of money, sell certainty. And it doesn't matter whether you're in politics or you're in finance. Human beings hate uncertainty. This is what we've proven in behavioral finance. People will pay very large amounts of money to get rid of uncertainty, the insurance industry being the classic example. So if I have an equation and I walk in, so let's say Paul was a traditional type of quant, and we're now asked what's the future for the dollar. And I give you some sort of stuff about financial history and don't really know, but I think it's going up. But Paul gives you an answer to 2 decimal places. Who do you trust? Mm-hmm. And it's a natural thing in a human being, we cling to certainty. This is why the dictators exist, because they walk into a room full of uncertainty. So it's been a fantastic selling tool. It's been highly rewarded because it plays on everybody's fear of uncertainty, and it promises you certainty. And I would say it promises you fake certainty. But it doesn't matter, it sells, and one day it won't sell. But at the minute, it's still selling extremely well.
my personal interest is in the future skills requirements. You talked about, I think you both talked about your different pathways into financial services, and to, Paul, you were quite sort of specific about yours from being a mathematician. What's your view in terms of the future? If the rise of machine learning, artificial intelligence, what kind of skills is the industry going to need in the future, and do we have them? And maybe even thinking post-Brexit, will we have the skills that we need in this country?
Well, everyone in finance has to program, and we're seeing more and more programmers needed generally, which I hate programming, and there are no programmers here, are there? Programmers are the most dull people. They're almost as dull as socialists. But I'm wondering what will happen in 10, 20, 30 years' time. Will the programmers be the dominant, the hierarchy? And so I'll be cleaning, I'm quite old then, but I'll be cleaning the toilets of the programmers. Or will it be there are so many programmers? There's actually people who can think outside the box, who are the dominant, in the
Or will
hierarchy.
machines be programming?
Yeah, exactly. Will we be living in caves and with tins of baked beans or whatever? I know how to knit, and I make jam and cheese. So I'm probably all right.
So, a multivalent then.
The corner shop I used to work in was a butcher, so I could make sausages, so we should get together. There's tons of skills. I mean, I do this sometimes at conferences full of fund managers to say, everybody's got a degree in politics, put up your hands. And it's never more than 1% of the people in the audience. And yet, what do we, if you're, I don't know how many people here are active in finance, all we talk about is politics. When I walk in there to talk to clients, we're talking about Trump, we're talking about Salvini, we're talking about Orban, we're talking about Kaczynski. This is what we're talking about. None of us are qualified in any spectrum to do that. We don't have any sociologists in the business. We've all got people coming out of business school. Now, there are some really honourable exceptions in the investment management community who don't hire people with any qualification in finance. So, we don't know what the skill set for tomorrow will be, but we can make a dramatic start today by firing half the people who've got formal qualifications in finance and filling those jobs with people who've got qualifications in sociology, politics, and psychology. That's a diverse recruitment policy. It's not that these firms are full of white men. They're full of white men who've all got degrees in finance. If you talk about groupthink, I cannot think of anything more dangerous than everybody studying the same degree and then going on to make different decisions.
Sorry, can I just interrupt and say, well, a vested interest, the MSc in finance actually bears this point in mind at the OU, and that's why we introduced a lot more economic and financial history. And you must remember that finance is linked to economics. Economics, as you've already hinted, is a social science, and if you don't understand the psychology and the sociology, then you are doomed, effectively. So in terms of answering your question I think going forward, you've got to have the ability to critically analyse, and I think many people have forgotten that. I meet so many people that can give me equations for the money supply of interest rates of unemployment, but they can't actually tell me what the unemployment rate is currently, or what the inflation rate is. And that lack of common sense, I think, links into what these two gentlemen have been talking about this evening.
The company I first worked for was full of classicists. It's been fantastically successful. It's an investment management company. Everybody who succeeded has studied classics. The next best company I know, the guy there only hired engineers. He wouldn't take anybody who qualified in finance because he just thought, well, why would I want to do that? I want to teach them this. All I need is have they got critical faculties? And if they've got critical faculties, I want them. And they went to do finance. They didn't have critical faculties because they were regurgitating the equations that they'd been handed by the faculty.
Yeah, there's some very famous hedge funds that only hire mathematicians, but they avoid anyone who's done finance.
Okay, well, again, so what does the future look like then? I mean, we've listened to what you're saying is wrong with it. How could we actually change that then? So one of the ways you've just said there would be to diversify the fields that people are coming from, so you get this a much more circular view of the same issues, perhaps, or different interpretations from different fields. I think that's something which the business schools are, in their defence, as I understand it, trying to grasp and recognise that you need to be more than a technical thinker. you need to have other skills as well as other types of knowledge. So is it going to be recognised, or do you think it's going to take some other kind of major intervention? What might that be? So is somebody going to actually say, no, we're actually just going to blow up the whole bonus thing, and we've recognised it's a big mistake? What could change it?
I'll give you something that will change it very quickly, which is a lack of liquidity. So the whole modern financial thing is based on liquidity, and I can be measured over 12 months because I can buy and sell things within 12 months, and therefore that's a legitimate thing to do. And it's very silly, and it's not actually capitalism at all. I don't know what it is. It's not capitalism. If one morning we woke up and there wasn't that liquidity, then it would be silly to try and measure me over 12 months. It would be measuring me over 3 years and 5 years. And as soon as we reset that, then everything is possible. Everything can be changed because the incentives can be right. So it can be, you just posited a proactive thing. We proactively go out and change it. No chance of that whatsoever. People are making far too much money out of the status quo. But you can have a change in the way the thing works, particularly a lack of liquidity, where they'll have to change, where they'll have to do something. So I have no faith in this system to proactively change. It hasn't changed post the great financial crisis. It isn't going to change while there's so much money about, but it's events, dear boy. And that can change it. And the one I would go for is a complete collapse in available liquidity, and then everybody will have to change.
Everything is about selling. That's what you learn in the corner shop. That's what I learned as a little boy running my zoo and other businesses. Everything is about selling. If you could get some great marketing person, some great advertising person who could put together some fund, say, that's got the classicist, the linguist, the doctor, etc., put them in and sell that concept. That's what you need to do. At the moment, it's really easy to sell mathematicians and physicists. It's much harder to sell.
But they are going to become more scarce because I think every sector is looking for those same quantitative skills at the moment, aren't they? So
well,
that's
everything's becoming finance, like I was saying, that the tail is wagging the dog.
But I think we've got to be careful as well. At the top end, we're saying that too much quants is a bad thing, and we need to tone it down. If we're looking at basic skills that 80 million people in this country do not have, basic numeracy, and they're making poor decisions which are costing them and the economy billions of pounds a year. Why aren't we addressing, going back to my issue of common sense, the basic numbers to start with? I think we'd all agree with that needs doing. So that is a problem we could address tomorrow morning.
Yeah, better informed consumers would help a lot. So financial education in schools, so that the consumer is more informed about the decision making, so that they can't be sold snake oil.
Quite interesting how much money the banks and insurance companies are making out of the poorly informed consumers. So it's not really in their interest either to.
Well, we're all saying the same thing. Paul said the same thing in his speech. There is a vested interest in the status quo. There's no way it changes until it falls apart. I mean, that's maybe a bit too pessimistic, but if it didn't change after what happened in 2009, you're going to need something bigger than 2009 to change it.
Mm. And we want to predict what that means. Oh, we've got a question. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Peter Carver again. Just picking up on something you said there, which was about the sort of basic illiteracy in financial terms of the population. And I'm wondering whether, following on from that, it's actually a bad thing that people are getting all these PPI refunds and all the other similar things. Are we actually demonstrating that it doesn't matter if they get it wrong, that they don't have to think about it, because don't worry, mummy will come and pick up the broken pieces and make a new one?
So no consequences to your poor decisions?
Yeah, isn't it like the, I can't remember what they called it in 2008, the moral hazard, yeah.
Correct. I mean, it's caveat emptor. Everyone seems to have forgotten caveat emptor. The state will bail out, and I think it's wrong as a free marketeer. I think it's completely and utterly wrong. We do need some failures, but at the same time, we have to help those people that haven't got the basic skills. That's where I think the focus should be. Tone down the quants, focus on the basic skills, but give people some responsibility. Don't subcontract it to the state.
So I did a talk in Ayrshire a while ago, talked about the history of 5% interest rates and how when interest rates were below 5%, people took extreme risks to try and get a 5% return. And a man came up to me later, I don't know what profession he'd been in, but he'd recently cashed in his defined benefit pension scheme for a large lump sum, as had many of his friends. And all of them were being offered 7% returns on investment in Portuguese vineyards, I think it was. So, I mean, this is the next thing waiting to happen. It's people cashing in to find, but they're really being badly sold stuff. They're being, they're being fleeced. And it's happening all around us today. And those people need protecting. Those people need, well, at least they need educating. He said to me afterwards, he said, well, at least I've learned that anybody offering me over 5% today is probably taking a very high risk. I said, well, it's not a difficult lesson.
I did the opposite. I had a good year. Well, I had many good years financially, but I had one particularly good year, and I wanted to put all the money I owed the Chancellor, my tax money, into something really, really safe. This is sometime in 2008. So I spoke to my wealth manager, and he had these two bonds for me. One was he said it was a very, very safe bond, and the other one was a very, very, very safe bond. It may be more technical than that, but that's what I heard. And so I opted for the very, very, very safe bond, just for a few months, because of the world was getting a bit dodgy, and I just thought put it somewhere safe for a little while. And the key thing was it was an insurance bond, because with insurance bonds I remember reading the 90% guaranteed by the government. Whereas just putting your money in the bank, it was £50,000 guaranteed. So the money was sufficient, it was a no-brainer. So that's how I found myself with an AIG bond.
Bongo.
3 days before Lehman went bust. And then it was just a very difficult few months.
I can't decide whether to feel good that you knowing what you know can do that, or really bad about it. But
well, there were other people, Jeremy Clarkson, Frank Skinner, they bought the very, very safe bond in AIG, and they lost half their money. I only lost 2%.
Jeremy Clarkson.
That's cheered me up. Jeremy Clarkson lost half his money.
Exactly. I was just going to say it's not enough for me.
Every cloud has a silver lining.
Yeah, I think we have time for one very quick question and hopefully some brief answers to that question from this lady at the back here.
I'm not sure how quick this is, but following on from the comments you've just said, so 2008 proved that governments are very scared of letting markets crash. They pump more liquidity in, they keep encouraging people to spend. You said debt is at its highest level. Before, boom and bust used to right-size the market. It used to bring it back down. Whenever anything peaked or troughed, it would right-size. That's not been allowed to happen. At some point, surely it's got to. How, when, have you got any ideas on what level we will get to before they actually have to let that happen, or what will happen to force that?
It's like you've got a child, my 2-year-old son, he's holding something, a knife or something that he shouldn't be holding. And so I try to take it off him, and I'm pulling, but then he's pulling harder and harder, and it's getting hard, and eventually one side is going to let go. Because we're pulling harder and harder, somebody's going to get knifed. That's my excuse if you hear anything on the news about me. Anyway, it's kind of like that. You want to release the tension earlier on. But something like AIG, if AIG had collapsed, and they're an insurance company, you get in your car and you think, oh, have I got car insurance? You'd be driving along, it turns out you've got car insurance through AIG, and suddenly you have a crash, and then lawyers get involved. If AIG had collapsed, it would have been the end of civilization as we know it. So it is getting worse. It's getting worse and worse. Yeah.
So it's difficult to be precise about the timing, but the 24th of June is the right answer. So what will happen on the 24th of June is there will be an election in Turkey. Probably the president will win it, even if he doesn't get the most votes. He will instantly, in my opinion, default on all the debts of Turkey through the imposition of exchange controls. The global financial system will lose as much wealth instantaneously as it did in the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, and the game will come to an end again. As you've pointed out, forecasting that it will end isn't difficult. Forecasting when it will end is very difficult, and I'm obviously being slightly facetious on 24th of June. The most difficult thing is to forecast what the governments do after that. And what it will be is not the same as the last time. That I feel very comfortable with, that it will be something completely different from what they did last time. So last time it was central bankers who were charged, you go and do something because we're a mess. This time it will be governments, new governments catapulted into power to come up with completely new remedies, though they'll be very old remedies for the financial historian, So don't expect the same reaction. Expect a reaction from governments that they think will be beneficial to stop this happening. But they'll be radically different, and they'll have much more of something of the 1970s about them. But as you know, it's possible to talk about this stuff for about 3.5 hours. So 24th of June, and the next bailout will have, as Anne Widdecombe famously said, will have something of the night about it.
Thank you.
My only comment, and Russell and I were at an event earlier today when we both talked about the imposition of capital controls and then debt write-off. And I am very serious about this. I believe there will come a point when not only public debt will be written off, private debt will be written off. And I think you interrupted and said straight away student loans. Student
loans will be written off. That's one of the different policy answers next time.
Yeah, it has to happen to cleanse the system. We've got ourselves into such a mess. Or you inflate your way out of it, which is the same sort of thing.
So if the central bankers can't inflate a way out of it, we get into some sort of debt forgiveness. So, forgiving, I always say this to students, I can't tell you what the future is, except you should borrow as much money from the government as possible. Because one day Jeremy Corbyn will forgive it.